Hey friends, my name is Kaitlyn Duchien,
And I'm Nicole Ellsworth.
and we are two motivated millennials on a journey to face the fear of our financial future.
It feels like millennials are too often left in the dark about finances. Yet we are a generation of entrepreneurs, influencers, world changers, and risk takers.
It's time for us to take charge of our cash money, honey, and do some real talk about budgeting, student loans, retirement, investing, insurance, blah, 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 so we have the confidence to live in the here and now without fear of the future.
We hope that this podcast will be a safe space where we can just talk openly about our questions and find clear, relevant answers.
But before we dig in, quick disclaimer. While we both work in the insurance industry, we are not financial professionals.
Our goal is to simply have an open and honest conversation about financial topics and to hopefully educate ourselves and others in the process.
But we are not giving legal financial advice. We highly encourage our listeners to bring the topics we discuss here to a financial advisor for professional guidance to meet your specific financial goals.
Kaitlyn and I are very excited and happy to have Bentley Heese with us today. After 2 years of asking and us talking about it, he's finally here with us. Bentley is currently a retirement income consultant with Ash Brokerage, and we're just so excited that he's finally here with us today. Bentley, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about you, your family, and your career?
Great. Hey, first of all, I want to thank you both for inviting me on Face the Fear. When I first saw what you were doing, I just was very excited because as a parent of two millennials, there's just so many areas financially that the younger folks just don't necessarily get exposed to through at least public education. So I want to commend you for doing what you're doing. So I've been with Ash for 8 years as a retirement income consultant, and it's really an anti-wholesaler role is kind of how we like to view it, because Ash is a distributor, so we aren't beholden to just one insurance company. We truly take a product agnostic stance, and we really work to strive for what is in the best interest of the client, because it's always better to justify than to defend what you've done for your client. And working with Ash has been a joy. It just worked out so perfectly when I made the transition from my former job that it couldn't have gone any smoother. And I just can't believe I've been here for 8 years.
So what initially brought you into the industry, Bentley? I'm curious.
So I've been in sales for a number of years, and it was kind of by happenstance that I got into financial services when a recruiter approached me and thought that I would be a good fit. So I got licensed and worked for what is now Wells Fargo Bank as a financial specialist. And that led me to getting into inside sales support for an insurance company that was used to be GE Financial and then became Genworth. And then the longer I got into working with financial advisors, the more satisfaction I got out of helping them help their clients sleep at night, and worked through a lot of different sales channels while I was at Genworth, and ultimately worked with the distributorship channel, which at the time they called specialty. And then it just worked out that an opportunity occurred over at Ash Brokerage that just I was a great fit for, and I got out of my comfort zone and I went for it. And like I say, I've been here for 8 years. I've been in the financial services industries for 20 years, helping advisors, and it continues to be very rewarding to help them take some risk off the table for their clients.
So we also know that you are a parent of millennials, which is one major reason why you're joining us today. I know you're passionate about Face the Fear podcast and always have been, but ultimately you have experience yourself talking to your kids about their lives in general, but also money. And coming from someone who's in the financial services industry, you have an even more unique perspective on what that looks like, both for them and how it may differ from what it looked like for you at their same age. So from that perspective, what is one thing with your kids that you feel like is is different for them from a financial standpoint than it was for you at their same ages?
Great question. I feel like when I was their age, number one, we didn't have the the necessity for us to control our own retirement as much as we do today. We had a huge amount of defined benefit plans. My father was an anomaly because he was a dentist, so he was self-employed. But you think about most workers, you know, 40 some years ago would have gotten a job and a lot of times would stay with that same company. So they would have a pension from the company and then they would get Social Security and they might have a little bit of savings and they would be, in reasonably good shape. But we saw in the 80s, it started out, the defined benefit plan, was gradually reduced with the advent of the 401k plan. Sadly, many individuals, and myself at some points in time, aren't maxing out their 401k plans. So, as a parent of a millennial, what I've really tried to stress to my two, now they're both in their late 20s, but just to really encourage them to start saving money early. And that was something that was never really stressed to me. But I feel like anybody who starts in their 20s, even if you're not able to put away more than just, even if it's $2,000 or $3,000 a year, whatever you can do, if you get up to age 30 and you've already got, let's say, 50,000, 100,000, whatever, saved up, even if you couldn't save a whole lot, for several years, just the time value of having that money fully invested for another 30, 40 years can make a significant difference. So I think it's get started early. And also, we all know that if we start these habits at an earlier age and we're more disciplined, it's going to really impact us throughout our whole adulthood, like when we change jobs and we have children and all the different life stages that we're going to go through.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really important point that I know Nicole and I have talked about a little bit on past episodes, but just how for previous generations, they didn't necessarily have to think too much about how they were going to retire and whether or not they would have enough money to survive in retirement until they passed away. But the dynamics have completely shifted, and the millennial generation is probably the first to experience that in its entirety. I would say Gen X also will experience a lot of that too, but they've at least been able to retain a little bit more of, the past pension benefits and things of that nature than for millennials. It's a really low number of people who still carry pensions with them into retirement. And it's hard for anyone in the Gen X or previous generations to even advise because it's not like they lived through it and learned from their mistakes and are now trying to communicate that to millennials. I think millennials, fortunately, are going to, a lot of us will experience that firsthand of, I didn't realize how much I had to save, and now I do. And so for then maybe future generations going forward, it will be much more of a stated fact of, you need to be putting money into a 401k early. You need to be opening an IRA early or whatever it is, because the landscape just looks so different.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Now, I add one other thing that I think is just that I never really was aware of it until I got into the financial services industry, but it's just so simple. And it's a great way to kind of think about how money can grow. And y'all, I think you both know about the rule of 72. Not, but people outside of our industry don't always know how simple that rule is to think about. And you can divide something into 72, and that'll show you, how many years is it going to take for that number to double. And if we look back at how the markets tend to grow on average, and let's say it's just 8%, that's every 9 years, your money is going to double. So, if you're able to save some money in your 20s, and let's say you're 30 years old and you've got, $50,000 already saved up, then when you're 39, you're going to have $100,000. And then when you're 48, you'll have $200,000. And then, 57, you'll have 400,000. So you see how it kind of works. I mean, it's like once you've doubled that number a couple times, it's going to continue to be very impactful as we go through time, and we see how much we can end up with to help us have a smooth glide path into our distribution years when we don't have any human capital of working anymore.
And is that rule of 72 something that you talked to your kids about specifically, or were there any conversations you had with them around financial skills or tips growing up that you've found to be beneficial for them?
Well, I think the other thing, we do talk about Rule 72 because it's helped me impart into them like how important it is to start saving money early. But as far as any tools and tricks, I mean, with the internet having so many really good resources and most young people being very proficient on navigating the internet, I'll recommend a few different things. But one just a company that we all know of that seems to have I don't know what their statistics are but Fidelity has a tremendous platform. In fact, that our 401k plan is on the Fidelity platform. And from just an individual standpoint, there's good resources for even people to just set up their own accounts within Fidelity. And I think that, that's since I'm familiar and I like some of their mutual funds, and they have other than just theirs, I just felt like it was a really good platform for young people. I mean, you can get in there and, just tell it you're going to retire in 40 years or whatever, and it'll give you several different options of creating of where to save your money as far as in the different available selections that they've got.
I agree about Fidelity being a great platform, and this is in no way sponsored by Fidelity. That would be awesome if it was, or promoted, but just even in my own experience, my 401k is through Fidelity, and they do a great job of not only creating a pretty user-friendly website that makes it simple to understand how to navigate and whatnot, but they also offer a lot of free resources in regards to getting help, knowing where to start. So that can help to demystify a little bit as far as, for maybe someone that doesn't work for a corporation that has a 401k and wants to look into opening their own, IRA or Roth IRA. Fidelity is a great place to start, one of many options where you can do that, but it does make the process a little bit simpler than I think people realize.
Agree.
Bentley, how have you found that saving for retirement has changed for you, even from when you started to now? Like, has that shifted and changed? And have you talked about that with your kids and how that's changed for you in the past?
Absolutely. And so the first question, how it's changed for me, well, obviously, as a baby boomer and a younger baby boomer, but still a boomer, just the explosion of technology and just how even like I think about not just the explosion, but the exponential growth of it, because I feel like it's the pace of the technological advances continues to increase and improve. So it's a double-edged sword because we do have a lot of really wonderful calculators and tools and data that are available at our fingertips, but you still have to manage your own fear and greed, because those are the things that haven't changed. I mean, throughout the history of man, going back to before Christ, fear and greed have driven us. I mean, even looking at the pandemic recently as an example, but with all the tools available, I think that we can be inclined to sometimes look too much online at some of these accounts, and you just have to really trust in the markets over let's say the years that you work leading up to about the final 10 years, because when you get to about that retirement red zone area of about the last 10 years of your working life, that's when you really want to have a long look at how your risk is aligning with your goals. And obviously our risk is going to drive our investment behavior anyway throughout our accumulation period. But as a younger person, we should be more open and willing to risk, but not everybody is. But you have to still be very cognizant of risk and reduce and mitigate where it makes sense, especially as you get closer to the time when sequence of returns is not going to be your friend.
Mm-hmm.
I like that you bring up risk and how younger people should probably be more open to risk to ideally have higher returns, with the understanding that if you're younger, you have lots of time to ride out the highs and lows of whatever is happening in the market, and knowing that historically, over time, the stock market does go up. Short-term investing is a little bit of a different story, but if you're in it for the long haul and you have 20, 30, 40 years before you plan on retiring, you can ride some of those waves a bit more. And something that I just talked to my grandpa about recently was how he and his retirement plan and just his savings and financial life has been so entirely different throughout his entire life than even mine has been in my short 5 or 6 years since I've been in the working world, where he's a pretty conservative guy and always has been. He was a business owner for many, many years, but he never really got into the stock market. That was something that, felt very foreign to him. He really just wasn't interested in it. And so most of his investments were in things like CDs in the bank and bonds, for example. But in the times that he was living, he could get pretty good interest rates on CDs and government bonds, high grade corporate bonds, to where he could retire and be just fine with the sale of his business, with his conservative investments, and with a little bit of a pension as well. So for me, that's not really an option, at least not today, when we look at the bond prices, which are more of a conservative investment. They're very low, and it's not something that will ever get us to where we need to be in 40 or 50 years to retire. So I think I'm just so passionate about what we do, what Nicole and I do on the podcast, to talk about this stuff and to encourage people who aren't familiar at all with finances, investments, to start looking into it and doing research, so it doesn't seem like this big scary thing. It feels accessible so that they're on a better path long term going forward.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I would also throw in there that you made me think about that when you talked about your grandpa and the interest rates, because we've had such a complete paradigm shift from having interest rates, that were so high around 1980, but for the past 41 years they've been declining. So what used to be just such a safe bet, I mean, now the 10-year Treasury is at like 1.5%, when for years it was closer to 4%. So I mean, it hasn't been over 2% really for like the last like 10 or 12 years. So you have that going on, and you've also got I was thinking about from a lot of the millennials, that you all experienced from 2000 to 2010, which a lot of times we refer to that as the lost decade, and now we've got this last decade that was overwhelmingly a lot of upside. So you've seen a huge dichotomy of market behavior in a relatively short period of time. And I think that's actually made some millennials, more risk averse, because, you still think about a little when you were younger, like, the whole 2008, but how some people were really very much devastated and had to delay retirements. And yet now you've seen so much, continued robust growth in the market. But you're in the back of your mind, and all of us, we just think, when's it gonna something like that gonna happen again? And that's where you need to really look at your risk and have some of your portfolio, especially as you get older, in areas that you're either completely eliminating the risk, or at least mitigating a portion of that risk with some of the different financial solutions that are available from financial advisors today.
Yeah. Okay, let me see here. Now that your kids are where they're at, what kind of advice would you give to them that like if you could go back in time and give them additional advice that you have not given to them already, what kind of advice would you give to them?
So great question. Um, what I would tell them, because when I was looking through some different information, one thing that I never really imparted to them until recently was, pay yourself first. And I would say that's got to be in your mindset. Or and as a and as a person who's into my faith, I would also include that pay the Lord first, or whoever, whatever your charity that you're into, take care of your own savings first, and then attempt to help somebody else's situation as well, and then you'll still have plenty to live off of after that. But always pay yourself first, so you're saving a portion of what you earn. And then the other thing that I would say is I've always been very good at leveraging my debt and utilizing it effectively. But there have been times in my life when I've had way too much debt. And that's one thing that I really try to strive for with them now, is to really, look at your debt as a tool, but really more, to me, just the only area that I would think it really makes sense to have debt, in my opinion, would be like, buying a house. As anything else that you do, as much as it is ever possible, you're much better off if you have the means to save some other little buckets of money. Like if you're buying a new car, or you pay your old car off and you were paying $300 a month for your car payment, try to keep saving that $300 a month, so that when you have to replace that car, you've either got, a sizable down payment or enough money to pay cash. I have a lot of friends that have done well. They never do. They never use their debt for anything. They pay cash for everything. And it's admirable to see people that have been able to be that disciplined in their savings approach. So it's that disciplined savings approach and paying yourself first that will keep you, out of that trouble of the debt delinquency, or having far too much debt in years when you really don't want to have debt, like when maybe when your children are getting ready to go to college, or just different times in your life.
I love that. Save yourself, or pay for yourself. Pay yourself first. Can't talk. Pay yourself first. Save for yourself first. And something that we've brought up before is how great automatic savings can be, and automatic retirement plan contributions as well. And even just speaking for myself personally, I found that I actually do a better time with my 401k watching market, dips, the waves that happen, when it's automatically put into that 401k account directly from my paycheck versus, coming into my savings first and then me moving it into a separate account, mainly because it doesn't even really feel like my money yet to begin with. It's just the separate account that I never had the option of taking to spend on a car or clothes or going out to eat. It's just always been there. So I kind of feel like that, just from a psychological and a mental perspective, really helps me to not only touch it, but to ride the waves a little bit better when the market's going crazy and GameStop circumstances happen where you're like, should I have bought some stock? What do I do now? How do I get into it? It just separates that a little bit more, so you don't feel as much, you don't have as many decisions to make in that process. It's just there and it's done, and it lets you rest a little bit easier at night.
Yeah, absolutely. I think even some companies will allow you to take your check and separate into different accounts, like where you want that money to go also. And if you don't have a service or something set up, you can say like, I want $100 taken from my check and put it into my savings account versus directly into my checking. And yeah, HR departments should check into that also. That's something available as well.
Great comments. And Kaitlyn, I love comment about that it's not your money yet, that's really a good way to look at it, because I had a point in time where I had to take some out, a number of years ago, and then retrospect, I still always think like, gosh, what if I hadn't touched that, how much would it be? How much more would I have now for what's getting a lot closer than I ever would have thought it would be. Let's say I got another, 10 to 12 years left to work at most. So yeah, I like that. And I'm gonna use that with my kids. It's not your money yet. Because you could, well, I'll pull it out of my 401k. Well, you really don't want to do that, if at all possible. I mean, there's a couple of things maybe, but we're not going to get into that on this podcast.
And this may be a ridiculous analogy, so take it or leave it. But I think of this in a similar way to, looking at my future self when I'm 65 and recognizing that that bucket of money is for my future self. It's not for my today self. In a similar way, I think of like nights when I know I'm going to go out on the town and may have a few drinks with friends, thinking about my future self in that circumstance of, let's make sure that before you go out that you eat something, that you have an Uber ready, that you drink lots of water, things that just help your future self out. So future Kaitlyn is like, man, thanks so much for eating a dinner and drinking lots of water. So the next day after a few drinks, you don't wake up with this raging headache and feel, terrible. So again, crazy analogy, but I think that will resonate with at least a few of my friends who listen to this podcast and know that I do that. Similar thing, except way more important for your future self of, hey, I can wake up at 50, 55, 60, 65 and say, wow, thanks, young Kaitlyn, for being disciplined and for creating more of a sense of security than feeling the need to just instantly spend it on whatever comes my way today.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's great. And you made me think about the fact that our future self, like as a society, we are more inclined to spend, effort and money on planning our vacation, which could be 1 week or 2 weeks, versus, what could conceivably be 30 to 40 years in retirement. But we still do that. And I mean, I've seen it so much this summer because everybody's just, chomping at the bit to get back outside after being, shut down for the past 14 months, that there's some pretty elaborate vacations going on this summer, but yet people still seem to ignore, the 30 years or more that they're going to be spending retired. So great point.
Yep.
So going forward, Bentley, I'm curious if you have just general advice that you would give to millennials, but also the next upcoming generation as well around, we talked a lot about retirement, but just in general, maybe it's life advice even that you would offer to them, that you feel like would be, something that you wish you would have known at a younger age, or you're a really wise guy. So we would just love to hear any sort of insights that you would like to share with our audience.
Great. Well, Kaitlyn, first of all, I think you're confusing me with your father, but anyway, so what I would tell you, and I've told this, and and even I do it myself more now. Any area of your life that you want to be better in, you need to have a mentor. And it doesn't matter the age of that mentor, it's relevant, but it's irrelevant. Well, let's put it this way. For your age, maybe it's a little bit more relevant, but once you get, let's say over 40, it becomes less relevant, as we've all had, some different types of experience. And we're going to know that, Kaitlyn is more experienced in retirement planning, so she'll be my mentor because I'm just getting into the industry. But, you find a mentor for, if you want to run a marathon, you don't just go buy a pair of running shoes. You hopefully you find a mentor and you find a plan and a program. And if you want to be a better, financial planner, hopefully you're going to work in a group where you have an older person that you can you have as a mentor, or even in your career. I've done it with Ash for a couple people. And anybody who has ever had the joy of being a mentor, it really is, as you said, because you do get the feeling that you're the wise person, because the younger person or less experienced, because again, the age is not always the main thing. Um, people like to be asked to do something like that. So if you're listening to this and you are looking for mentors, people, majority of people, unless they're a narcissist, they're going to love to be a good mentor to you.
In which case, you probably wouldn't want them as your mentor anyway.
Right.
Or a narcissist.
That's very true.
That could be a great way to find out red flags about whether you do or you don't want someone as your mentor. But yeah, I think that's great, great advice. And taking that a step further, is there a way that you would suggest people look for and or approach mentors? Just because I know, myself and others listening may think, well, yes, I would love a mentor, but where do I start? Where do I look first? How do I ask them without making them feel awkward, or, myself feeling awkward asking? Any suggestions around that?
So in the workplace, I think there's a couple of different ways that could be approached. One would be, depending on which, your company that you work for and how large that company may be, look within your department that you're working in and look to see who's specifically leading that area, and approach that person, because either and you could even say, you just do it open-ended so that you're not necessarily, making them feel awkward if they don't want to mentor you, but giving them the first opportunity to have the first right of refusal, or perhaps you might want that person to mentor you and they will do it. But if otherwise, they'll typically recommend somebody else. Or even in, most organizations have like a younger employee affinity group. Those can be good because typically you're going to have some people that are going to mentor that group as well. So those would be two really good areas. Or just even if there's somebody that you admire for whatever reason, you just feel like, somebody really seems like they've got it together in some area of your life where you'd like to get better, just, approach that person.
I think that's great advice. And I've had the privilege of being mentored by some amazing people at different stages of my life. And it's one thing that's been invaluable, and that I am so humbled and grateful for, to how it's helped me get to where I am today and to have so many doors open for me. And I would agree with you, Bentley, that it's such an honor to be asked to be a mentor. I've had that happen a couple times, and it's always just, again, very humbling to feel like you're in a position where someone else sees that you're a little bit further along on the path than they are, whatever that path may be. And you may still feel like you're still at the start of the journey. I do. But even just approaching someone that you would like to mentor you with a curiosity, asking questions about, how did they get to where they are? How would they suggest that you improve your situation? How can you overcome challenges? Is a great way to even initiate that conversation. So I'm glad you brought mentorship up. That's huge.
Yeah, the one other thing that I would throw in there would be, look around at your peer group, that your friends and your associates, and if you sense that anybody in your group is either struggling or isolated, reach out. Just give them a call, text them. We're coming out of a really strange period in our history, and there's a lot of lonely people, and a lot of broken people that just need that extra. They want to know that people care. And if you might even I think about too, like, when I was young, like, you're like, man, we were such a jerk to that kid, in high school, because they were different, and now, the older we get, we tend to embrace what is it that makes us different, because that's what truly makes us unique. But those folks oftentimes took a lot of, teasing or whatever. And we know who they are. I mean, if you have any opportunity you see any of your peers or friends struggling, just check in with them. It's very, very important.
Especially after this year.
Yeah.
With people not being in the office, and maybe it's not as obvious that you can tell maybe a coworker of yours is upset when you're only seeing each other over Zoom calls or something. But I mean, I agree. The amount of times that someone has reached out to me to check on me and how much that's meant, it's been something that I am so grateful for and appreciative of.
Right. And it does. You'll
Yeah.
see. I did it once with one person. They just came to mind, and I gave that person a call. And obviously you've seen me do a lot of talking during this podcast. I didn't get a word in edgewise for 45 minutes. So they obviously just really wanted to have somebody to talk to.
Yep.
Well, Nicole, do you have any other questions? I think I've gone through my list for Bentley.
Yeah, me too. Let's see. Bentley, if anybody wants to get a hold of you, how do we get a hold of you? LinkedIn? You share a lot on there.
Yeah, LinkedIn, and my last name looks like Heese, the way it's spelled, Heese. And then bentley.hess@ashbrokerage.com, or my cell phone, which is 804-873-1511.
And we can put all of that in the description of this podcast as well, whether it be YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. So if anyone is curious to know more from Bentley or has questions for him, check there, reach out. I'm sure he would love to continue the conversation.
Yeah. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today, Bentley.
Yes.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed being here today.
Yay, good. All right. Well, you guys can always email us at facethefearfw@gmail.com or visit us online at facethefearfw.com. Did I get that right, Kaitlyn? Yeah.
Yes.
Hopefully. All right. Well, thank you both.